Um, so thank you. My name's Damien. I'm the operations director for a social purpose organization called Noise Solution. Some of you may have heard of us. I'll talk to you about the work that Noise Solution does briefly in a second. We've won over the last few years something like one or been shortlisted for 25 separate awards for our work on impact management and impact measurement. And it's that work that I'm going to be talking to you all about today. So, we've got a slide change, have we? Excellent. And then I can relax. Noise Solution, what do we do? We hook up with young people from alternative education, mental health, youth justice services, generally young people at the edge of those services. We hook up with them and we hang out and we make beepy noises. It's genuinely that simple. We come alongside young people, we find out what they want to make, and we work with them using predominantly digital music making tools to make that music. We've been doing this since 2009. We've done lots of research into not what we do, but why we get the impacts that we get. And whilst we come alongside young people and make beeping noises with them, actually how we do that is really important. And at the center, essentially what we're doing is coming alongside a young person and putting them in control of what's going on. What do you want to make? How do you want to make it? Who do you want to share that with? You are in control of when and where we meet you. All of that kind of putting a young person back at the center, that truly person-centered working. We make young people feel good at something. So we use music genuinely because my colleague who started the organization in 2009 is a drummer, and that's basically all he can do. Um, I think there's something about creativity and something about music making that's really important. But essentially, we're using digital music making tools to make young people feel good at something again when the context of the conversations around them generally are that something is failing in their lives and they are not being good at something somewhere else. Most importantly, though, we are building relationships from a kind of strength space. We are developing online digital stories where we capture video like the one I'm going to show you in a second, of the young person being good at something, whether they've put a track together, learnt to play the drums, play the keyboard, whatever it is. Here is this young person that is being perceived as a problem or an issue in some part of their lives being good at something. We put that in a digital space to allow the young person to see it, to allow people that are important to them to see it, mum, social worker, teacher, probation worker, whoever, and for those people to be able to comment on what they've seen. So we're externalizing and validating success. At the end of every one of those sessions, we record a short reflection video, really naturally conversational. I'm about to show you one. You'll see two people. This happens to be an online session. You'll see Yaz at the top, who we worked with for a couple of years. Yaz will tell you and knows that I will tell you that if she didn't work with Noise Solutions, she'd be in jail or dead. She's neither of those things, I'm very pleased to be able to say. And Saran is one of our musicians. We've got about 25 musicians across the east of England. Every session, we record one of these videos. We're delivering about 800 hours a month at the moment across the east of England. So we're getting lots and lots of this unscripted data in our inboxes every day.
I've gone from having the worst 2 weeks I've ever had in my life with my mental health, managed to somehow keep my head above water and not do anything stupid or break anything. But I feel like it was worth it because at the end of all of that pain and tears and anger and all them emotions comes this little bit of music that I made. And that makes me happy in itself because I've progressively done something that is making me happy.
Considering everything that you've been through the last 2 weeks and for this to come out of it, that is nothing short of amazing. So I'm very proud.
I'm immensely proud of myself. I am feeling a lot better in myself today than I was last week.
completely unscripted, natural conversation between two people that contains all of the impact information we could ever need and more. So I want to rewind about 5 or 6 years, and I remember this moment vividly. This is the start of the work that we're now calling Transceive, which I'll talk to you about shortly. I was sat in our office in a live music studio in Bury St Edmunds, literally paying a developer in beer and pizza to build a word cloud object for us, because at that point we could see the importance of being able to understand large amounts of unstructured data. We could see there was something there, and we were trying to grab it and trying to find out what we could do with it from an impact perspective. So he built a word cloud object based on session reports that our musicians write at the end of each session. It looks like a word cloud. It is a word cloud. It told us some things, but really not very much. But it proved the point that we could extract meaningful data from unstructured conversations, unstructured data, essentially. We pushed that forwards a bit with a V2 model, started to use a kind of off-the-shelf sentiment analysis model, looking at the sentiment of things people were saying in those videos, like the one between Yaz and Saran. It started to become more useful. It was still quite a manual process. We still had very little control over the model that was being used, but we were kind of progressing the work that we were doing around impact. And then GPT hit the market in a big way. This slide never fails to astound me in terms of how quickly GPT penetrated the market. So being the digital natives that we are, we thought, right, let's go and play with GPT, see what happens. I took some transcripts from the videos, like the one between Yaz and Saran, and I said to GPT, assess these things for the concepts that are important to us: autonomy, competence, relatedness. Assess those data and give me some results that I can work with. So GPT came back and said, yep, sure, here you go. Here's the results that you wanted. These are actual screenshots from that conversation. So I thought, well, this is brilliant. I thought, I have solved this. We've solved everything. We've got our impact nailed. I said to GPT, how did you do that? And GPT said, I made it up. Literally said, I made it up. So then I cancelled the yacht in the south of France, went back to our technical partners and said, how do we actually make this work? From there, we have, fun fact time first. Here we go. So the charity sector in the UK spends about 15.8 million hours a year reporting. Everybody from the charity sector in this room will go, yes, and that's just me, I would expect. But quite often we're using methodologies that just don't work, right? From an impact perspective, we're trying to equate these kind of bums on seats data with impact data, right? The two are not the same. We're talking about different things. We're carrying out case studies. Generally at the end of a program, we grab a couple of people for whom a program's gone well, we take pictures, we interview them, we put a nice shiny document together. Generally what we're trying to do is create something to go back to a funder and say, our project went really well, and can you give us some more money, please? Or we're sending out surveys and feedback forms that everybody hates, right? That doesn't collect the data that we want to collect. And the interesting box at the end is there anything else you'd like to tell us? And that's the bit when we're filling out feedback forms where we go, oh, now I can tell you what I wanted to tell you, because all of that other stuff doesn't apply to my experience of your program. So we're spending 15.8 million hours using methodologies that are basically ineffective. But here's the kicker. Everybody's telling you what they think every single day, right? Through phone calls, through WhatsApp conversations, through Slack conversations, through website chatbots, through case resolution records, Noise Solution, through those reflection videos. Think about a housing association and their kind of call centers and their phone transcripts, right? We're working with an organization in Scotland that communicates with homeless people via WhatsApp. Those conversations are happening every single day around you. And if you could sit down and talk to every single one of your beneficiaries, think about the things that you'd learn, right? I think we've now made that possible. In January, we launched Transceive. We are still in the parlance pre-seed, pre-revenue. We're still selling you mostly snake oil. We've got a working prototype in Noise Solution that we're now working to make available to the wider sector. Effectively, what we're doing is connecting to those unstructured data sources, right? We're going to where those conversations happen with your organizations, whether it's phone call transcripts or whether it's WhatsApp or whatever. We're using a very well evidenced academic understanding of motivation to analyze those conversations. And then we're asking Transceive to return two types of data. From that conversation, return me number data that I can count over time, that I can measure distance traveled over time. I can measure changes in feelings of motivation over time, and give me some qualitative data to bring those numbers to life, right? So tell me the most positive things someone said about their autonomy, for example. Bring those numbers to life and pull out those nuggets of gold that people tell you in conversation. But we're a social purpose organization, so trust and ethics is really important to us. And I know that I suspect we'll talk about this in a little while. But we see kind of three main areas that we should absolutely be concerned about in terms of the use of AI, in terms of the use of large language models. The first of which is what happens to our data, right? We're working with vulnerable people, we're working with marginalized populations. What happens to our data once we send it off to this kind of AI black box? What's that black box doing with those data? Where are those data going? What are they doing with it? I think that's really important. Bias mitigation, we spoke in our room briefly. I've just finished writing a paper, which you can see on the right-hand side, looking at bias mitigation in large language models. I think that unless we solve the issue of large language models producing, replicating, magnifying biased responses based on the biased data that it was trained on in the first place, unless we solve that issue, I think we have to do that first. Otherwise, those responses, the work that the LLM is doing, the large language model is doing, is going to fundamentally impact the very communities that we're trying to support, right? So I think this is fundamental. And we are proposing in the paper some interesting ways to kind of deal with that. If anybody's more technically geekily minded, I'm very happy to talk about that more. And then the environmental mitigation, right? I read a piece briefly in the paper yesterday. The UK is running out of water. The UK is running out of water because we're cooling data centers all the while, right? So how do we limit the water and power consumption and the carbon emissions from the use of large language models, right? I think these are three fundamental pillars that we need to get right if we're actually going to do anything ethically and socially responsible with large language models. Because we are talking amongst funders, I think I see a fundamental issue for the funder community in the room and worldwide is how we compare impact across diverse portfolios of organizations, right? So how do we compare the impact of a boxing club with a lunch club for older people or Noise Solution, right? Both of these are impactful, but being able to understand the impact that these organizations are having at a kind of portfolio level, I think is really quite complex. And again, I think the work that we're doing perhaps goes some way to solving that issue by providing a common impact framework where all of a sudden funder and fundee and portfolio can coalesce around a common language, right? Can see exactly where impact is being generated and impact isn't being generated. And we can start to really quite neatly divert funds to places where we know we can have a social impact using a kind of common impact framework. If we solve the privacy, the environment, the bias issues. But I don't think we should see AI as the answer. I think we should see AI as a tool to help us do that. But I think we should absolutely not see it as the answer. And I think we should figure out ways to allow AI to work alongside us rather than expecting AI to solve the issue, because it won't. I just wanted to leave this slide on the screen because we're talking about using AI to solve all of society's ills, right, and make all of these issues better. And this is a quote from a paper I was reading when I wrote my literature, and it's talking about the way that AI holds a mirror to society, right? And we can clean the mirror, we can clean the AI, but I think we still have to focus on fundamentally addressing those societal issues that make the mirror dirty in the first place, to extend the analogy. That's it for me. There's a Linktree QR code on the bottom where you'll see all sorts of different information about Noise Solution, about Transceive, etc.
Damien, that was amazing. Thank you so much. Gosh, we'll make sure we share that link as well. There's so much rich stuff in there. If you've got specific questions for Damien, please add them to the chat. Lots of applause already. Damien, just amazing. Thank you. But let's come back to broader questions in a minute. But for now, can I hand over to the wonderful Rachel from the Robertson Trust, please?
Yeah, thanks. So hi everyone, I'm Rachel and I'm a learning officer at the Robertson Trust, which is an independent grant-making trust based in Scotland. And we work to prevent and reduce poverty and trauma across Scotland by funding, supporting and influencing solutions to drive social change. So I don't have a professional presentation like Damien, but I'm just going to provide a bit of background to why we're starting to explore AI in relation to reporting, what this is going to look like for us so far, and some of the things that we're learning and considering as part of the process. So we're starting to see more of our grant holders using AI for their reports, more so for applications at the minute, but we're also seeing them starting to use them for end of year and end of grant reports as well. And we're quite happy for them to do this because we're seeing the benefits of using AI for that, particularly around efficiency and improving the accessibility of reports. But one thing that we're seeing is it sometimes means that grant holder reports can be a bit generic and potentially not adapted to the individual organisation. And for us, that can just make our analysis process a wee bit more time consuming, because we sometimes have to go back to organisations to kind of clarify specific details within the reports. But as we see AI being used more widely by grant holders, and because we can see the benefits in that, we're keen to explore how we can use it ourselves internally to support us to analyse and pull out key learning from those reports. So this is particularly relevant to the work that myself and others in the learning team of the Robertson Trust do. And that involves using our impact and insights framework across our 4 themes. So we have 4 themes across our work. So financial security, work pathways, education pathways, and nurturing relationships. And across those 4 themes, our impact and insights framework kind of helps us to understand, firstly, what differences we're making as a funder, and what differences our grant holders are contributing to, but then also collectively how our work as a funder and grant holder work is contributing to broader social change. And as part of that, a large part of kind of the impact and insights framework is analysis and looking at samples of grant holder end of year reports within each theme, as well as kind of external evaluations, and pulling out key evidence around impact and outcomes being achieved, as well as summarising key themes around good practice, which is helping to achieve those outcomes. And in line with the open and trusting commitments, the format for end of year reports gives grant holders quite a bit of kind of flexibility and choice in how they want to report on their activities, and the differences that they're making. And so it's really up to them and what they want to tell us about the work that they've been doing throughout the year. But that often means that we receive multiple different sources of evidence from grant holders. So that includes the kind of main end of year report that's hosted on our Salesforce system. But quite often grant holders also send us attached kind of case studies, other external evaluations and impact reports, which are often kind of attached separately from those main end of year reports. And for us in the learning team, it's been quite kind of challenging and time consuming to identify and summarise meaningful learning about impacting good practice across those multiple different reports, which currently kind of aren't integrated in one system or in one place like Salesforce. So at the Robson Trust, we're quite keen to consider how we might be able to use AI internally to help us to draw out and summarize key learning points from those different sources. And some staff across the organisation have been attending events like this one to learn what other funders are doing. And across those kind of funder events, a lot of the things that have been highlighted is just how there's so much to consider, particularly things like what Damien was talking about around the kind of accuracy and reliability of the information that generative AI tools can currently produce, and things like the data privacy risks with putting kind of confidential and sensitive information into public tools like ChatGPT. So internally, that means that we're starting to consider only using tools like Microsoft Copilot instead of ChatGPT, because with Copilot, any confidential grant holder information that we're putting into the tool and analysing through end-of-year reports would remain within our organisation's existing security boundary because we're using Microsoft 365. And that means it wouldn't be exposed to kind of a public domain like ChatGPT. So it kind of limits those kind of risks with exposing private and kind of confidential information that grant holders are sharing with us. But that being said, we don't have a trust-wide policy on AIs yet, so we haven't really progressed very far with kind of piloting different approaches or experimenting with different AI tools until it's really clear what we can and can't do and can and cannot use AI for kind of internally. And another thing is because we're signed up to the Association of Charitable Foundations funder commitment on climate change, and we're also very mindful of those environmental footprints that AI carries, and because of what Damien was talking about, the kind of significant amount of energy and water that's needed to run these tools. So at Robson Trust, while we see kind of potential to use AI to create kind of those efficiencies in time-consuming reporting and analysis processes, we're really keen to kind of get the balance right around using it responsibly as well. And there have been some suggestions from staff that have attended kind of funder events around AI that would be helpful to start developing some sort of sector-wide step-by-step guide to support organisations to begin exploring how we can utilise AI and introduce those small efficiencies, even internally to begin with. But then also building our knowledge around what works best, both for funders and grant holders. So that's just some reflections on the Robson Trust experience with exploring AI within grant reporting, and then some of the sort of considerations and challenges that we've come up against as part of that. So thank you.
Wow, Rachel, that was amazing. Thank you so very much. It feels like there's so many kind of opportunities and challenges. There's always this balance to explore, right? Loads of opportunities for experimentation, lots of new insights. I'm always, in fact, before I carry on, if anyone has any questions, we've got a small enough group, I think, for you just to raise your hand or to put something in the chat. So I'll come in a second. I guess a question for me, for both of you. One of the things I'm always interested in is, as we generate new insight, how that changes what we do. So is there anything you've learned from either your experiments or from the way in which you're analysing those videos, Damien, that have surprised you with insight that you wouldn't have otherwise got?
I think we are at the beginning of that journey. So we're now starting to collect data within Noise Solution and now starting to overlay other data on top of it, right? So I think a kind of adjacent answer is that we are now in a position to be able to answer some of the questions that we've had for a long time, right? So does an increase in engagement in the digital story environment make young people feel better? We've never really been able to answer that question, but now we're collecting the data where the young person's telling us that they're feeling more connected to other people, and we're collecting the well-being data that tells us how the young person feels about themselves. And we're already collecting the digital engagement data, so how many likes, how many comments, how many people, all that kind of stuff. So we're now starting to be able to triangulate these data points to answer some of the fundamental questions. The reason that's important for us is that if we can prove that more engagement on the digital story makes young people feel better, then that's where we're going to target our resources, right? So we're able to directly use impact data to drive up what the business does and drive up impact.
Brilliant, Damien. Thank you. Rachel, anything from you from your experiments?
I think, yeah, for me, kind of as I said, like we've at the Robertson Trust kind of not really experimented too much with different tools and stuff like that. But I think something that's kind of surprised me from kind of listening to Damien talk is actually how many different tools are out there. I mean, I think within the Robertson Trust, we've only really been thinking about kind of the ones that everybody knows about, kind of GPT and kind of Copilot. But yeah, I think it's really interesting to hear about the kind of variety of different tools that are out there that we could kind of really start to kind of look into for using for our grant holders, but also using internally. And yeah, that's something kind of really exciting that there's a lot of tools out there that we could start experimenting with.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. See if there are any questions coming up in the room. If anyone wants to raise their hand or make a comment. Fantastic. Millie.
I think what I've just really enjoyed is when Damien was talking about people just having a conversation, because I run various different dementia cafes, and all of the data I seem to get is that how many people have attended Bums on Seats, how many hours they attended for, and it's very bland. And I like the idea that perhaps I could get data from just having the lovely conversations that we have and using that to then be able to drive the whole wanting to get more funding, wanting to get more people engaged. Because I think with a lot of the stuff that I do, it's the stories that are what sell it. And the fact that there might be the opportunity to get AI to help me showcase that and be able to get the data from that is something I'm really quite interested in.
That's a great observation. Thank you so much for that. There's something really interesting there about how we can learn from the activity that we're delivering or involved in, rather than from a learning activity that we're creating in order to generate some insight. That's really how we can align those. There's also another thing that came from a workshop last week where someone shared that as the internet was kind of taking off, the unit cost of accessing information suddenly became almost zero. And now the unit cost of synthesis of lots of information is almost zero as we can understand some of these tools. So the chance for us to understand from lots more of information. And I guess the other part there is not just from our own work, but I wonder what it would look like if we could look across everyone in this group today to really understand, or everyone that's working in the youth sector, like what's it look like if we could open up some of this data and some of this insights.